Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us.
It's great to be here.
Today we're shifting gears a bit, heading over to Maui.
Beautiful place.
Yeah, not exactly for a vacation though.
Mm.
We're going to be diving into the aftermath of those devastating fires in Lahaina back in August of last year.
Right, August 8th.
Yeah, a story that really, I think, has stayed with all of us.
It's hard to forget.
Absolutely. But we're going to be going beyond just the headlines today.
Yeah, we need to.
Our main source material is a book called Burn Back Better. And it's written by someone who actually lives and works on Maui.
Saw it all firsthand.
Yeah, and really experienced this tragedy in a very personal way.
And that comes through so strongly in the book. You know, it's not just like a dry recounting of the facts.
It's more than just a timeline.
Exactly. It's like you're right there on the ground with them, feeling the emotions, the confusion, the fear.
So we're getting the human impact then.
Definitely. And I think that's what's been missing from a lot of the coverage we've seen so far.
Absolutely. And what I found really fascinating was the way the book starts. It throws you right into the chaos through the eyes of the author's mother.
Oh, yeah. She was actually working in Lahaina when the fires broke out.
Can you imagine being right there in the middle of it all?
I can't even fathom it. And the way she describes it, you can just feel the disbelief, the confusion as these fires are just exploding all around.
Fueled by those crazy winds they had that day.
Exactly. And what's even more unsettling is that she and many others say the emergency sirens never even went off.
Wait a minute. No sirens. But isn't that like the most basic warning system you'd have in place for something like this?
You'd think so, right? It's just mind-boggling that something so crucial could fail in such a critical moment.
It's almost like the people were abandoned.
That's exactly the feeling a lot of people had. And it gets even worse. There are multiple accounts in the book of people trying to escape Lahaina, get out of harm's way.
But they couldn't.
They were met by police blockades.
Blockades? You mean they were actively preventing people from leaving?
That's what the book describes. And it gives specific examples, too, like there were 2 police cars reportedly blocking the north exit from Front Street onto the Hanawapilani Highway.
Are you serious? So these people are trapped with fires raging all around them, and the very people who are supposed to be helping them are blocking their escape.
It's a chilling thought, and it just adds to this whole sense of chaos and confusion that surrounded the event. And there's also that story of the citizen journalist who was stuck in traffic.
I read about that. He was being directed in circles by the police while the fires were just raging around him.
Exactly. It's just unbelievable. And then you've got the whole issue of the school buses.
Yeah, the book really focuses on that. Like, they were just sitting there untouched while people were desperately trying to flee.
Hundreds, maybe even thousands of people could have been evacuated on those buses.
And it makes you wonder about the missing children, right?
So many kids still unaccounted for.
It's heartbreaking. And then, to make things even more suspicious, the book mentions that some schools were requiring non-disclosure agreements from people involved in cleaning up after the fires.
Like, what's going on there? Why all the secrecy?
It definitely raises a lot of questions.
Yeah.
It's understandable why people would be suspicious.
Absolutely. Especially when you consider the government's response to the whole disaster or lack thereof, according to many residents.
That's a whole other can of worms. From what I've read, it seems like a complete mess.
There are reports of delayed responses, slow arrival of aid, and even allegations of FEMA officials staying at luxury resorts while locals are struggling in shelters.
It's like they're living in 2 different realities.
Exactly. It just fuels that feeling of abandonment. Like those in power are completely detached from the suffering on the ground.
And then you have Governor Josh Green. The book brings up his preemptive emergency proclamation, which gave him a lot of power just weeks before the fires.
Right. And then there's that slip-up he made about smart cities shortly after the disaster.
It's all very suspicious.
It makes you wonder if there's a bigger agenda at play here. And some residents believe the fires were a calculated land grab.
A way for wealthy developers and individuals to capitalize on the tragedy.
Exactly. A perfect storm of incompetence and greed, as the author puts it. But it gets even more complicated because the book also delves into some pretty controversial territory.
Like what?
Well, it explores the whole DEW debate.
DW.
The theory that directed energy weapons were involved in the fires.
Okay, now that sounds a little out there to me. Like something out of a science fiction movie.
It does sound far-fetched, I'll admit. But it's important to acknowledge that DW technology is real.
Really?
The U.S. government has openly documented and invested in its development.
So you're saying it's not entirely impossible?
The question is whether it was actually used in the Lahaina fires. And that's where the debate starts.
So what evidence does the book present to support this theory?
Well, there's the whole issue of the Air Force facility on Maui, the AMA site.
I've heard of that. It's a research center, right?
And some of that research involves directed energy.
Interesting. So there's at least a geographical connection.
Exactly. But then there's the anecdotal evidence, too. Witnesses describe these strange burn patterns.
Like what?
Cars completely melted, but the asphalt underneath is untouched. Some trees burn to a crisp, while others nearby are perfectly fine.
That is strange.
And some people believe those patterns are consistent with what a DW attack might look like.
Okay, but couldn't there be other explanations for those burn patterns? It seems like a big leap to go straight to DWWs.
It is a big leap, and the book doesn't necessarily make that leap outright. What it does is raise questions, present the possibility, and let the reader connect the dots.
So it's more about prompting critical thinking than pushing a specific agenda.
Exactly. And it also explores a potential link to China, specifically the research of Steve Favis.
China. Now this is getting interesting. What's Favis's theory?
He claims to have found evidence of Chinese satellites with DW capabilities in orbit above Maui at the time of the fires.
Wow, that's a pretty bold claim.
It is, and it's just one piece of this very complex puzzle. The book also explores the possibility of weather manipulation.
You mean like intentionally altering the weather?
Exactly, specifically geoengineering as a potential factor in the Lahaina fires.
But how could they manipulate the weather to cause something like this?
One theory put forward by Dane Wigington suggests a wind tunnel effect was created over Lahaina. The idea is that this wind tunnel could have superheated the fires and created those unusually intense wind conditions we talked about earlier.
But who would have the power to do something like that? And why?
Well, this is where things get really conspiratorial. The book links these ideas to the World Economic Forum, the WEF.
Oh yeah, those guys. The global elites who meet in Davos every year.
Exactly, and they're all about solving climate change, right?
That's what they say.
But some people see their agenda as a cover for power grabs and control. And the book specifically mentions the WEF's 2030 predictions.
What are those?
It's a whole vision of the future with some pretty unsettling implications for things like individual freedoms and ownership.
Okay, but how does that tie into the Lahaina fires?
It's about the bigger picture, the potential motive. If you believe the WEF is trying to reshape the world according to their vision, then manipulating weather, even causing disasters, could be seen as a means to an end.
So it's all connected in this grand conspiracy theory.
That's one way to look at it. But even if you set aside the more outlandish theories, there are still so many unanswered questions about what really happened in Lahaina.
It's a story that keeps getting deeper and more complex the more you dig into it.
Exactly. And we've only just scratched the surface.
Well, it sounds like we've got a lot more to unpack in this deep dive.
We were just getting into some pretty wild stuff before with those theories.
Yeah, those DDWs and weather manipulations.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. But even if we put those aside for a moment, there's still so many unanswered questions about what happened in Lahaina.
Right. Like, how could something this horrific happen in the first place?
And why was the response so inadequate?
Burn Back Better really highlights the failures at every level. The book talks about this hotel manager who was stranded with guests and staff for days after the fire.
Days. With no help.
They were running out of food and water.
That's insane, especially considering they were right next to the ocean.
And an airport.
It just doesn't make sense.
The author says aid was incredibly slow to arrive.
It's like the system completely broke down.
And that raises a really disturbing thought. If the response was this bad for what we're calling a natural disaster...
How would they handle something more deliberate?
Exactly. What if this wasn't just a tragic accident? What if there was something more sinister at play?
Those are the kinds of questions that keep me up at night.
The book lays out a number of coincidences and inconsistencies that really make you wonder.
Like what?
Well, did you know that the Maui police chief, John Pelletier, was also the police chief in Las Vegas during the 2017 massacre?
No, I didn't realize that. Wow, that's pretty disturbing.
The deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history.
And now he's overseeing the response to the deadliest wildfire in over a century. It's a little too coincidental, don't you think?
It definitely raises some eyebrows. And then you have those eyewitness accounts of police blocking exit routes during the fires.
The book mentions that too. And it also talks about reports of FEMA officials staying in luxury hotels while survivors were crammed into shelters or sleeping in their cars.
It's those kinds of details that make it really hard to swallow the official story.
And while the book explores those fringe theories, it also dives into the media blackout that happened right after the fires.
Yeah, journalists and independent investigators were denied access to the burn zone. They were threatened with fines, even physically intimidated.
It's like they were trying to hide something.
The author herself shares her experiences with intimidation, being followed by unmarked vans receiving threats.
That's terrifying. It creates this whole atmosphere of fear and suppression.
Which brings us back to those unsettling questions about the missing children.
The book features interviews with survivors who describe finding entire families incinerated in their cars, unable to escape the flames.
And that drone footage of the school buses parked near the burn zone, completely untouched by the fires.
Those buses could have held hundreds of children. Where were they during the evacuation?
It's a mystery. And then there's the fact that some schools required people involved in the cleanup to sign non-disclosure agreements. It's like someone is trying very hard to bury the truth.
All of this just feeds into that sense of distrust and suspicion.
This feeling that something much darker is going on.
So where do we go from here?
Well, the book also talks about the potential shift in land ownership after the fires.
You mean those reports of developers contacting residents right after the disaster, trying to buy up their properties?
Exactly. There's a real concern that the rebuilding efforts will prioritize the interests of wealthy developers and corporations over the needs of the Lahaina community.
It's like these people are being victimized all over again.
The book includes some really powerful testimonies from residents who spoke out at council meetings.
They talked about feeling betrayed and ignored, right?
Yeah, and fearful of being priced out of their own town. They've lost everything, their homes, their businesses, their loved ones.
And now they're facing the prospect of losing their community, too.
It's a tragedy on top of a tragedy. And Burn Back Better ends with a call to action. It urges readers to stay informed, to question the official narrative, and to support organizations that are fighting to protect the Lahaina community.
It's a reminder that the story of Lahaina is far from over.
And that we all have a role to play in ensuring that justice is served.
That's a heavy message, but it's an important one.
Hmm.
So what are your takeaways from all of this?
What strikes me the most is the resilience of the human spirit. Even in the face of unimaginable loss and so much uncertainty, the people of Lahaina are coming together.
They're fighting for their right to a future in their own town.
And that's a fight we should all be paying attention to.
We've been through a lot with this book. The fires, the official response, the missing kids.
The theories.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff. But what keeps sticking with me is the feeling that we're not getting the whole story.
Burn Back Better really challenges us to think critically. To question what we're being told.
And to look deeper.
Exactly.
And one of the things that really stood out to me was the work of this guy, Eric West.
The real estate agent.
Yeah, he's featured in the book, and he did some incredible investigative work.
He's the one who got that drone footage of the school buses just sitting there.
Untouched by the fire.
Right in the middle of the burn zone. It's just bizarre.
And he points out some other weird things, too, like those strange burn patterns.
The melted cars, but the asphalt underneath is fine.
How does that even happen?
It's hard to explain with a normal fire.
So that's where the DDW theory comes back in.
The book actually gets into the science behind it. How directed energy could create those kinds of unusual effects.
Okay, I'm starting to see how it's possible. Yeah. But what about the pink soil?
The stuff the EPA is using in the burn zone.
Yeah, the book seems pretty skeptical about that.
They question why it needs to be dyed pink in the first place.
Do they have a theory?
They think the dye could be obscuring something, hiding evidence that might contradict the official narrative.
So like a cover-up.
Potentially. And it fits with that pattern of secrecy we've been talking about. The media blackout, the intimidation tactics, the non-disclosure agreements.
It's like they're trying to control the narrative.
And keep certain information from coming to light.
Which begs the question, what are they so afraid of?
That's what we need to figure out. Burn Back Better doesn't have all the answers, but it connects Lahaina to some bigger trends that are pretty unsettling.
We talked about the World Economic Forum, the push for smart cities, the silencing of dissenting voices.
It paints a pretty bleak picture.
It can feel overwhelming.
Oh.
Honestly, what can any of us do about it?
Well, the book urges readers to get involved, to support local organizations like the Maui Tenants Association.
They're doing great work advocating for the Lahaina community.
It's about fighting back against these forces that are trying to reshape the world in their image.
To make sure that the rebuilding of Lahaina benefits its people, not just wealthy developers.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming our power and demanding accountability.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners today?
Don't just take our word for it. Go read Burn Back Better for yourselves. Explore the sources, the evidence, the different viewpoints.
Form your own opinions. And remember, this isn't just about Lahaina
It's about questioning the narratives we're given.
and demanding better from our leaders.
It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and sustainable future.
And that starts with being informed and engaged.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power.
So keep learning, keep questioning, and keep fighting for what's right.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a journey.
And a reminder that the truth is out there if we're willing to look for it.